Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 82nd episode of Retuning Your Firm. And as you can see from the slide, today's theme is coaching and mentoring the next generation of leaders, which is a pretty serious agenda, particularly if we're going into a world where people really do need to win work very, very effectively. So I'm Richard Chaplin. Great to see you. And I'd now like to introduce my co-host, Francesca Lagerberg.
Thank you very much indeed. Wonderful to be with everybody today. We've got two fantastic people joining us today, Richard, haven't we? We've got Richard Oakes and we've got Virginia Cook. So maybe I'll just say a few short things about each, and then we'll be cracking straight into hearing from both of our panelists with some questions for everybody right at the very end as well. So let me introduce Richard Oakes. Richard is the CEO of the O10 Group. He's an advocate for leadership change. So I think we're going to be hearing about a whole range of different ways that you can bring leadership right to the forefront of everything that you do. He runs an advisory firm, and he is also very experienced in taking all of this knowledge to the people who actually can make a difference as well. So we'll be hearing from him in a few moments. And our second guest today is Virginia Cook. She's with Kreston Global, and she doesn't want to tell you how many years she's been working on this, but it's all about experience. It's a very, very good level of knowledge working across big four firms, mid-tier firms, legal firms, lots and lots of different insight here into coaching and into leadership. So let's go back to Richard Oakes. Richard is going to share with us some thoughts around the whole topic of leadership. Richard, over to you.
Coaching for me is an incredibly powerful, one of the most powerful, I think, interventions you can make. And why do I say that? Because it allows people to be the very best version of themselves. If you can create the space and provide the structure and the challenge and the compassion to allow people to be their best self, we all know that most people in their work environment, there's lots more they can bring. So coaching for me it's a great skill. It is something of a personal journey if you decide to coach people. It's a great gift to be able to give people that you work with. And for me, coaching, I think there are four critical components to coaching. Great coaching. The first is to always, in my experience, to coach around a purpose and a context. What impact is the coaching going to have on that leader, on the system they're part of, the system they're part of shaping, and really making sure you've got clarity at the outset. So coaching is really about helping your coachee, or if you're being coached, to deliver an extraordinary goal, something out of the ordinary. As a great coach, you want to be able to bring someone to a new level of performance. So really inviting right at the outset, just be really clear about that context and be really clear about what the goal is. And also to get that shared. If you're coaching a managing partner or a CEO, get them to share that with their executive team, to share that with the people most closest to them, because they're going to need support to do something extraordinary. So that's the first thing around purpose and context. The second is, as a coach, be clear about your own intention. And your intention in helping that person to be successful, to become something more than what they already are. And there's so much work done on the importance of intentionality. Whether it's the MIT Change Crowd, Otto Sharma or McKinsey or whatever it is, intention is really at the heart of what you bring as the coach. And for me, there are sort of a few components to that. The first is, what would you like the person to think when you're coaching them? What would you like them to feel when you're coaching them, and ultimately what kind of output would you like to help them achieve? And really, before each coaching session, be really clear about that. Almost write it down. My intention for this session is, and that primes the brain. Intention primes the brain to allow you to listen. And we all know listening is the key skill in coaching. So that's the first two: purpose, context, and intention. The second is have a structure. And invest in yourself as a coaching professional. So I'm an accredited Daniel Folkman extraordinary coach, and I've read widely on the subject as well. And most people will know there are certain coaching frameworks. There's the GROW model. But for me, the four key stages in a structure. Firstly, frame the conversation, allow the coachee to be clear about what it is they want to achieve from that session, what matters to them, what are their concerns and frustrations. Then allowing them a chance to unpack and understand the systemic issues around any particular kind of deliverable or any particular challenge they're looking for your help to coach through. What's happening at multiple layers in that system? And most importantly, what are they contributing to holding themselves back? Then explore the desired state. What is it they want to get to? Push them a little bit. At that point, I think you can start to offer maybe your mentoring advice. Would it be helpful if, you know, I gave some suggestions, and make sure that they lead with some accountability. And the fourth thing I would talk about is holding the space, asking great questions, and listen. You know, being totally attentive and giving all your energy into the person that you're coaching. So for me, coaching is one of the most important gifts, and those four things: purpose and context, setting an intention, your own intention, having a structure, invest in yourself as a coach, as a professional capability, and holding that space for people. And for me, I see the greatest development in leaders I work with if you can hold that sort of structure in any intervention. So that's my perspective. Back to you, Francesca.
Much indeed. I must admit, I over the years, I've benefited so much from both being coached and coaching qualifications. So I think there's an awful lot there we can unpack later on in the session too. Hugely helpful part of leadership, I think. So Virginia, it's now over to you. You're going to take us through some other elements of leadership, and love to hear your thoughts and hear your experience.
Okay, thank you, Francesca. So I've got a slightly different take on this subject, really from my own experience. And it kind of started quite a long time ago when I worked for Arthur Andersen, which sadly is not with us anymore, as many of you will know. And they invested they were pioneers really in this area. And they were quite known for investing sort of 10% of their revenues into training and development. And one of the reasons I wanted to join them was because of this. And I think, you know, even that reputation was very important, and what people look for nowadays is this whole investment in training and development. And one of their flagship programs was a program for lateral hires, as they called them. So somebody like me, I'd been brought into the organization to be effective. And what they recognized in this program was that you can bring these really expensive people into an organization who've got this fantastic talent and knowledge, but if they haven't got a network, then it's really hard for them to hit the ground running and be effective and bring in the cash. And I've taken that with me in my sort of marketing journey through various professional services firms, because I think marketing, you know, our job is to be a coach and a mentor and help people. And what I find, particularly looking at this next gen area, is that the next gen, everybody wants to learn. They want to work together, and they want to be effective. So a lot of what marketing does, I think, is try and bring people together and try and teach them how to build their networks and how to extend their networks so that they can be effective and they can create relationships and have pipelines of opportunities and so on. And I, in my current role, I do a lot of coaching and mentoring, but create, and Francesca will know all about this, this sort of international environment is a whole other network on top of the domestic environment. So when younger people and sort of next generation people come into these large environments, they have to again build their networks. And so what I tend to try and do is create communities, bring these communities together. And I've been working recently on younger people and getting them more engaged in the network and getting them more involved in the network. And so we've set up this sort of program which was primed by a focus group of sort of, you know, some millennials and some Gen Zs and and ask them what it is that they want from their careers and from their sort of development. And they all want the chance to meet people and connect with people and the chance to learn and grow. So the program that we're putting together is training them in business development, training them in leadership, and helping them to create these international networks. And we had this fantastic success story. Recently, we had a world conference in Madrid. It was our first one in 3 years. And we kind of shook it up a little bit. And we brought these next gen sort of managers, senior managers to the conference, where normally you get, you know, the senior guys and girls who sort of make the international, you know, workflow for their organizations. And we brought these younger people in, and we got them to present. And I had to work quite a lot with them to get them ready for this presentation. They were a little bit nervous, but I can't tell you they just came alive when they realized that people wanted to listen to them, and they were the whole conference was electrified by this presentation that these next generation sort of managers and senior managers gave, and they just learned so much from that experience of putting themselves out there, you know, spending a lot of time thinking about it. We've done a lot of research and a lot of work, and they literally were walking on air afterwards. And I think there's nothing better than learning, you know, making these connections, feeling valued, feeling you've brought benefit to something that you're involved with. And they are both, the two managers I had are so motivated now in terms of making a difference in the network, getting involved in the network, and so on. So I suppose my take, and I've got, you know, I've got a lot of sort of stories about how you get people to do this, but you know, marketing professional services is all about being able to see and touch and believe in the professionals that do the job. And I think that they really exemplified that and had a massive learning experience from it. So that's...
Thank you, Virginia. That was fantastic. Really, really helpful. I'm going to hand to Richard, the main Richard.
Yeah. Oh, well, I don't know about main Richard. Gosh, I think all our guests were equally important, and that's included me in the piece as well. Richard, I have the point about holding that space. It's a lovely concept, but do you actually try and define that with your coachees, or is that something you keep to yourself as the coach?
I'm quite focused on my intention, like you know, what is it I can do to allow people to see what's happening from different perspectives, to give them time to think about the situation they face, and asking great questions. For me, holding the space is all about the quality of questions that you ask. You know, a great question, which is often not asked, is what are you contributing? Why is it the situation like this? And what are you doing to contribute to it? And then just being quiet, you know, and allowing the person, even if, you know, silence is often very uncomfortable. But silence is the place for me where the thinking happens, right? When someone's talking, they're not thinking. And in a coaching environment, and I'm talking intimate one-to-one coaching here, allowing that space, literally using silence, and just let the person struggle, right? The struggle is the agenda. If this person could solve the problem on their own, you know, they wouldn't be struggling. And therefore our job, I think, is to hold that with compassion and create that environment. I am upfront about when I'm coaching, this is going to be a deeper experience, to try and dig into the unknown, you know, what's below the surface of the iceberg, because most of these folks can do their day job, you know, pretty well. I see my job as a coach to dig in and say, how can I get extraordinary performance? That's why we chose the Extraordinary Coach program, you know, to push people beyond what they would normally be able to do. So that's that the silence and the questions is a very deliberate, and also setting that extraordinary expectation is what I would see as the sort of two bookends of holding the space, if you know what I mean.
That's really interesting. Francesca, as the perhaps sort of reflecting today's theme about the next generation of leaders, and we've heard from Virginia about how bringing them onto the stage and making them realize that their views really do matter has been hugely helpful. But I remember years ago talking to the managing partner of an accountancy firm who said, yes, I've sort of worked out who my successor is, and it's an envelope in my desk which can be opened when necessary. Where do you think the CEO, how does the CEO approach the whole issue of succession planning, do you think?
Well, yes, I kind of think the envelope of the desk, let's hope that's been consigned to history. I think it's one of the biggest challenges for good leaders is to leave behind not only a legacy, but a pool of people who are capable of doing it. I'm a huge fan of leaders not picking their successor, but creating a pool of people who are able to do it. Because I think you tend to create people in your own likeness. It's very hard not to, and sometimes you need a different person to take over and to take the organization to another stage. But it's absolutely incumbent on the leader to have a pool of people who could fulfill those roles, ideally a diverse group with different skill levels. I do think sometimes there's this expectation that there's a super person sitting there just ready to burst forward and do everything. And the reality is you're probably going to have some people fantastically skilled in one area, others fantastically skilled in another. But going back perhaps to the coaching side of it, it's how do you coach people through so that they're able to reach their potential and be available for those kind of roles. The other thing that I think has really struck me, particularly perhaps in the volatility of our last few years, is that who was necessarily going to be the successor of an organisation might have been a lot clearer in some times and in some areas. Perhaps there was a clearer path. And if anything about the last 3 years have shown us is that the world is moving at an extraordinary pace and speed, and the right kind of leader might not necessarily be what you thought it would be. And I think for accounting firms in particular, sometimes they need somebody who's steady, who's going to keep things on an even keel. Sometimes they need somebody who really has got those amazing abilities to deal with absolutely adverse economic conditions. And sometimes you need someone who's a visionary leader, and you don't necessarily need them at certain times. Timing is everything, I think, in these pieces. So being able to have a group of people and being able to be one of them to shine through as being right for that time is wildly important, I think.
I just really wanted to bring Virginia into that, because you've seen, as you said, lots of different organizations. I mean, have you seen situations where leaders have really understood the importance of the next gen of their successors, if you like, or just waited for somebody to drop out of the ballot box?
I'd say over the last 5 or 10 years, well, probably the last 5 years, I think sort of leadership in mid to large size firms has really changed, certainly in my experience. I think people understand now that leadership is much more about emotional intelligence, is much more about the ability to motivate people beneath you and the ability to retain people. I mean, our crisis certainly in our sector is the retention of talent and attraction of talent. And I think leaders have got that front and center in terms of their priority. And I think really enlightened leaders these days understand the need for flatter structures, for less hierarchy, for massive opportunity, for sort of flexible firms and adaptable firms and great development programs. So I think leadership has changed a lot now, and we're seeing there are some really exciting people out there doing some really innovative things, and I think really great leaders are on a constant learning journey and know that they are, they're only as good as the people they have around them. And I certainly see a lot of that now in the sector, and I'm quite inspired actually by it.
What about you, Francesca? Newly minted leader, you could argue.
Yeah, well, I've been CEO for about 5.5 months now, haven't I? Yeah, I think there is a real shift. I think there's a much more openness towards appreciating the value of the coaching style of leadership. I think command and control arguably began to dissipate away some time ago, but it still rears its ugly head from time to time. But I think there's something incredibly powerful about harnessing the next generation. And I know, Virginia, you talk beautifully about showcasing what they have to bring. I mean, I was chatting to some of our younger potential future leaders just the other day, and just the ideas, the passion, the enthusiasm, they have about a whole host of issues that perhaps some of the leadership are a bit more jaded about, been there, seen it, and then suddenly this sort of burst of energy comes through, and about things that really matter to people. So about mentoring, about reverse mentoring, which I think has got a huge place to play in leadership, and a fantastic range of different ideals and tools. And maybe if I throw it over back to you, Richard, because I think the coaching element of this is a hugely important tool. But I know a lot of professional service firms have struggled with how to bring coaching into their way of being. And I don't know how you've seen that operate over the last few years. Is that something that you're seeing more of? The people you're coaching, are they bringing that style into their professional services firms?
Well, at a very sort of practical level, in the last 2 years, our business and businesses like ours, which I would consider to be sort of like, even though we do sort of strategic client development, quite systemic change, the question actually below it is, can you coach our leaders in practice groups or client teams, or to get them more out of themselves, to realize more of their potential, to connect, back to what you were saying, Virginia, to connect people around the network, to bring people back together because of what happened in the pandemic and that sort of stuff. So we've had an explosion. Like, we're like 4 times busier than we were before, right? The phone goes mad. And if you dig underneath what the fundamental question that people are struggling with is, how can we create an environment of intellectual curiosity? How can we create an environment of people wanting to take responsibility for their own future, and wanting to get, because the world's too complex and too fast moving to try and control everything, right? So how do you, and Virginia, your story about the young, that younger generation, the level of intellectual curiosity that naturally you can tap into. And if I said, like, before the pandemic, if I can use that phrase, we were doing a lot of big system, like programmatic change. Take my top 10 client teams around the world and give us your program and we'll work on it. And now what we're seeing is, can you work individually with this particular leader and his or her particular team? So we're doing loads more coaching, in inverted commas. I'm not selling coaching programs. I'm selling client transformation, client leadership, networking, building better global relationships. But what's actually happening is more and more individuals needing coaching, open to coaching, wanting to take responsibility for their, it's like the old leverage model. Rather than leverage around fee earning, leverage around leadership, leverage around connectivity, leverage around creativity, leverage around energy, personal energy. So yeah, I'm seeing a huge shift in. We would probably do 90% programmatic change, 10% coaching. It's now probably 80% in a coaching way of supporting clients, even though their goals are fairly similar. It's much more personalized, much more bespoke, much more personal. I love that, because that's the work I'm drawn to do more and more of, because the energy. I heard somebody say, this is the age. We've had the age of the knowledge worker. We're now in the age of the energy worker, which I thought was really interesting. Like, how you bring people's energy into that role. And that's, Virginia, when you were talking about the energy, you could feel the energy buzzing off the stage, right? It's energy. And I think if you understand that dynamic of how you bring energy into an organization, coaching is a fantastic tool to do that, because it allows people to express themselves and bring their very best version of themselves into whatever the context is. So I'm seeing a big shift.
That's absolutely fascinating that you're seeing that come through. And I think there's something very powerful about how that is repeating itself in many, many different parts of the world as well. And we've got a great question come in, which is, Virginia, you might have a go at this one as well as Richard. It's about emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence, it's described as competencies, but I think it's about all the attributes of emotional intelligence. And people can read about it, they can go on programs about it. How do you actually change people's behavior? Is EI a learned process can people get better at it? And how can you actually make a difference between someone who perhaps hasn't leaned into that skill set before? I don't know, Virginia, if you want to say some words, and then we'll have Richard have something too.
I think most human beings have the ability to use their emotional intelligence. You know, that's the whole wonderful thing about humans, is that we are able, we're unlike most other sort of living organisms, and that we're able to tune into and recognize authenticity. We're able to recognize what's going on in somebody else's sphere. And some of the things when I'm training people in business development is to recognize that what's going on with somebody and read body language. So I think everybody is able to employ emotional intelligence. Whether they want to or not is a different matter. And I think if an organization decides that emotional intelligence is important, then you can certainly begin to help people recognize their strengths, recognize when they're at their best, recognize when things go wrong with them, and how to employ the emotional side of their world and their being to bring the best of themselves, and also to tune into other people's discomfort or concerns or wants. So a lot of it is about whether you want to, and a lot of people are quite shy and a little bit scared. But I think most human beings, I go back to that story, they really want to make a difference. I haven't met anybody, and when you plumb into their personal values, one of the things they want to do is to make an impact, make a difference on other people. So I think if you can track that back a bit and say, how can you do that, and bring that out of people, then I think emotional intelligence really does come to the fore. So did I answer your question?
Yes, I think you did. I think I'm going to let Richard have a crack as well, because I think it's complicated. I think a lot of people read books, go on courses, get the concept, but they don't necessarily change their behaviors. So I don't know, Richard, if you've got any hot tips there.
Yeah, it's what I said in the coaching thing. If you can talk about a deliverable, a project, something that's tangible, something that matters, that really matters to the individual to achieve, and you can unpack for them how a behavioural change will enable them to achieve that goal more effectively. And you can really get tangible, like questions like, what are you going to do more of to be able to achieve that goal? And what are you going to do less of? And I put in the note there, we use the Leadership Circle 360 as an instrument as well. So that really allows people to properly be able to see themselves as others see them, and how the emotional side of their input into an organization has an impact on other people. So if you can let people see it really clearly, and then tie the behavioral change to success and to progress, and have like concrete things you're going to do more of, what are you going to start doing, or what are you going to stop doing, and really get them to write those things down, then you've got a much better chance of people actually being able to kind of embed that. The last thing I would say is, if they share that with someone else, someone who they work with, and ask them openly, am I changing or am I not changing? Right? It's not something you do on your own. This leadership development is not a solo sport, right? It's not an individual sport. And getting people's feedback and being brave about it, say to my wife, tell me if I'm snoring in bed, right? And I'll try and stop, it's having that feedback loop. That if you've got an immediate feedback loop from someone who you care about, that cares about you, and you give them permission to call you out on it, I see that really helping in embedding that behavioural change.
Well, I'm afraid, guys, it's we've come to the end of our half an hour. So I'd like to thank, when you're enjoying yourself, it's amazing how time flies. Just picking up one of Virginia's points, I always remember years ago, somebody said to me that at the age of about 5, we start pretending we can't draw. And then most people go through their life persuading themselves they can't draw. If you actually give somebody a picture upside down and you ask them to trace it, they can draw perfectly. So it's all about framing, I think. So on that happy note, think about doing existing things in new ways. And thank a fantastic panel. Thank you, Francesca, for your insights as always. Thank you, Richard, for sharing what it means to be a coach in a very condensed way. I loved your purpose, context, intention, structure. It's very obvious, but sometimes people tend to jump too fast. They run to point 4, forgetting about point 1. And thank you for sharing, Virginia, bringing forward these new, really energetic, positive people who, they always say that if you are just sort of sitting there and nobody takes any notice, after a bit you stop coming up with ideas. It's the old factory book, I think. So thank you, everybody. And I thought it was a great session today. We now take a break. So we'll be back on the 13th of January. So look forward to that, and with 2 more guests. But in the meantime, have a great Christmas. It sounds crazy to say that, but that's the next time that we'll be talking. We'll be after Christmas. So there you go. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.